Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 960 for July 10th, 2022. Coming up in a few minutes.
Of course, as one does when one is finished with a distillery tour, you're handed a dram of what it is that they have magically produced. And I became the female doppelganger of the green Mr. Yuckface. You know, it was just an awful, awful experience. I thought I had been given poison.
Shelley Sackier started out in whiskey like most of us. That first dram wasn't the best one for her. But like many of us, she found her way down the rabbit hole and became not only a whiskey lover, but an educator and author. Her new book, Make It a Double, shares that journey, along with sharing some of her whiskey knowledge along the way. And she'll share some of her story with us later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. That's just ahead, along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast. Robin Redbreast? You may have seen me around. Face label, label face. Yeah, that's the one. I'm now contractually obligated to be their spokesbird. Yeah, my agent didn't read the small print. Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Dewar's brand ambassador Gabriel Cardarella here. And as the weather starts to finally warm, I wanted to remind everyone of one of the best ways to float in a pool with your favorite whiskey. The Dewar's Highball is simple and refreshing. Anyone can make it. Dewar's, ice, club soda, and a citrus garnish is all you need. Cheers.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. And last month we reported that Jackie Zykan was stepping down as master taster at Old Forester for a new opportunity. We now know more about that new gig. It's a new whiskey brand to be called Hidden Barn, and it's a partnership between Zykan, Royce Neely of the Neely Family Distillery in Kentucky, and whiskey entrepreneurs Matt Dankner and Nate Winiger. The initial Hidden Barn release will be a bourbon using whiskey from the Neely Family Distillery, and is expected to be released later this month. Jackie was not available for an interview this week, but we are working with her to get her on an upcoming episode. Meanwhile, Jackie's name is not on the news release, but her fingerprints are all over the latest release in Old Forester's 117 series. Whiskey Row Fire marks the 7th anniversary of the 2015 fire that devastated the 100 block of Main Street in downtown Louisville, while the building that now houses the Old Forester Distillery was being renovated. Firefighters from the Louisville Fire Department helped select the original barrels for a special 5-year-old release 2 years ago that raised money for the Louisville Firefighter Disaster Fund. This whiskey comes from the remaining barrels with an additional 2 years of maturation. It's available at the distillery in Louisville while supplies last for $59.99 a bottle. Last time around, we looked at the concerns about the future of American white oak forests. While there's still plenty of white oak available, distillers have been experimenting with other types of oak trees. For instance, Ireland's Teeling Whiskey Company's latest Wonders of Wood release is a single pot still whiskey that's matured in virgin chinkapin oak. Master distiller Alex Chasko explains what the difference means in the bottle.
It is a American oak, right, that is not as high in the vanillin content as you would typically get in Alba, right? It's more, I think it has an influence that's kind of a halfway between a European oak and an American oak. There's a spiciness there. There's a bit of, I call it earthiness, but maybe coffee, chocolate-like quality that comes from chinkapin. Chinkapin's a smaller oak. It's known in the cooperage industry as like a scrub oak, is what they refer to it as. It grows in more of your rocky soils. And like I said, it's been well known and well used, but not really getting much airplay.
The Chinkapin Oak release took top honors for Irish single pot still whiskies at this year's World Whiskies Awards. It's available now in the U.S. for $99 a bottle. As part of the project, Teeling planted an acre of native Irish trees in County Wicklow in a partnership with the Tree Council of Ireland. I'll have my tasting notes for the Chinkapin Oak release later on. And by the way, a new report from Ireland's Bord Bia confirms the U.S.'s position as the largest export market for Irish whiskies and other spirits. Exports to the U.S. last year totaled around $570 million. While whiskies and whiskey liqueurs like Bailey's accounted for most of that, there's an increasing growth in Irish gins and rums, just to name a few. In other news, our friends at the spirits business have come up with a special way to help support humanitarian efforts in Ukraine. They're auctioning an entire barrel of Rebel bourbon that was originally destined for a Ukrainian supermarket chain before the Russian invasion. Luxro Distillers agreed to cancel the supermarket's purchase and donated the barrel to the spirits business to raise money for the Disasters Emergency Committee's Ukraine humanitarian appeal. The auction runs through July 29th. We have a link for more details in the show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. Finally, someone paid what is most likely a record price for a single cask of whiskey, $19.2 million. The Financial Times reports Ardbeg sold the cask of 1975 single malt to the unidentified Asian collector and will draw 88 bottles from it each year for the next 5 years for the buyer. To put it in comparison, back in 1997, Moet Hennessy bought Ardbeg and all of its stocks of whiskey for less than half of what that collector just paid for a single barrel. In other words, the Ardbeg investment just turned a profit. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. The Black Bourbon Society's Open Door Tour wraps up this coming weekend in Los Angeles. Whiskey Live Sydney is also this weekend in Australia. Whiskey Live USA debuts in Nashville, Tennessee, the weekend of July 23rd and 24th. Tales of the Cocktail takes over New Orleans from July 25th through the 29th. Whiskey Live Perth is on August 5th and 6th in Perth, Australia, and Edinburgh's Whiskey Fringe returns this year from August 14th through the 16th in Edinburgh, Scotland. Finally, the Bourbon Women's Annual Symposium Conference takes place in Louisville, Kentucky, August 25th through the 28th. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it, and we'll add it to the searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. The calendar is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states and 3 continents, and online, too. Visit the new BuyVirginiaRye.com site for more details, and please drink responsibly.
While there are several claims to the first highball in the United States, Dewar's is certainly amongst them. The highball trend was born and proliferated in Japan as a more sessionable and alternative approach to enjoying whiskey. Sure, neat or perhaps with a drop of water or two is the best way to enjoy whiskey, but it isn't always the most refreshing. With infinite spins and twists on this relatively simple cocktail, it's important to start with premium ingredients. Our latest innovations like Dewar's 8-year Caribbean rum cask finish or our 8-year Mizunara cask finish are both complex, double-aged whiskeys that will stand up to the chill of ice and effervescence of soda nicely. The base recipe is simple, but the trick is temperature. Fill a chilled Collins glass with ice. Add 2 ounces of your favorite Dewar's over the ice, top with club soda right from the fridge, and lastly, throw in a lemon wedge or peel and serve. More time in the sun, less behind the bar. Curious? Begin with a basic highball recipe, then start experimenting based on your personal taste and flavor preferences. Sky's the limit.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. We all take our own unique journeys through the world of whiskey. Some are content to just enjoy whiskey for what it is, while others decide to learn everything they can about it. That's what led me to start WhiskyCast many years ago, and Shelley Sackier has been on a similar journey. She's been learning the ins and outs of whiskey for years now, and is the director of distillery education at Virginia's Reservoir Distillery. Now she's put her story into the new book, Make It a Double. It's one of the few whiskey books that makes you laugh while you're learning, and when I connected with Shelley on a Zoom call the other day, it became clear that the stories and the knowledge come from the heart. So let's talk about how you got into whiskey in the first place. And I guess we have to blame your ex-husband for this, according to the book, right?
There's a lot I blame my ex-husband for, but this is one area that I actually tip my head in gratitude, because I suppose we never really know what experience we're about to have and who it is that's about to provide it for us. And so my first handshake with brown spirits was a most unforgiving one. And it was early in my days. I think I was probably about 22 or so, and traveling with my not quite husband and definitely not ex-husband, but not quite husband or husband to be. And we were, his family is from the UK. So we were constantly going back and forth there, but he brought me to Scotland for the first time and said, you should take a tour of a distillery. I'm going to bring you to Oban, and you're going to get a taste of what makes Scotland so great. And of course, as one does when one is finished with a distillery tour, you're handed a dram of what it is that they have magically produced. And I became the female doppelganger of the green Mr. Yuckface. You know, it was just an awful, awful experience. I thought I had been given poison. It was such a strong and unforgiving taste on my palate that I questioned as to why anybody would repeat it a second time. So that evening, we were staying in a beautiful country house hotel outside of Edinburgh called Balbirnie House. And the barkeep came over with this beautiful tray of 6 different whiskeys. So at the time, Diageo was in the middle of putting out this advertising, this sort of a marketing campaign to say, here's what all the flavors of Scotland are, and here they are represented in each one of their flavor regions and whatnot. So they had everything represented, of course, except Campbelltown, which they didn't own a distillery in. So for some reason, that one was left out.
Gee, I wonder why.
Yeah, so Campbelltown was nicked, but there were 6 others, and the barkeep said, while you're looking at the menu for dinner, would you, care for a wee dram? And my ex-husband said, do not waste your precious liquid on my wife. She has no taste for the scotch. And, the barkeeper just sort of like stood back and clutched his throat. And he's like, why? What have you tried? And my ex-husband said, I gave her a dram of Oban, and you would have thought I would have given her poison. And he said, you did. You can't start somebody brand new to brown spirits on something on that end of the spectrum, right? And so he brings the tray over, and he's telling me, I'm going to give you something that's going to be much more palatable, much more friendly to your taste buds. Something in the region of the lowlands, right? The Garden of Scotland. This is what's referred to as a lady's malt. So he gave me a dram of Glenkinchie, and he described it as he's pouring it. He's like, it's flowers, fresh cut flowers, and vanilla and cheesecake. And I said, you're making it sound like a marmalade cosmopolitan. So hand it over. And I took a sip and thought, this did not taste like turpentine. I was so relieved. And it was because of that man, because of the barkeeper there, who said, you have to start in a palate appropriate place with some drinks. And it just so happens that Scotland has this, vast array of flavor spectrum. And so let's teach you bit by bit with something that's much more enticing. So anyway, I don't remember what the name of the barkeeper is, but I would have dedicated the entire book to him had I known.
How do you go from there to spending time at the Bruichladdich Academy as a student?
Yeah, it was an interesting pathway, but I think a fateful one. I was really lucky again because my husband at the time was British, still is British. He was bringing us back and forth to the UK frequently. And since I was forced to go visit with his family, I said, if we're going to go spend a lot of time with some of these folks, then you are also going to be shipping me up north because I want to go back to Scotland. And I had fallen in love that very first trip, just stepping right off the plane in Glasgow 30 years ago and said, this feels to me like I belong here. I don't know what it is. It's the smell of it. It's the taste of it. It's all the people, their rich history, their stories, it's the folklore and the mythology that goes along with every village, and everyone has a yarn to spin, and they're so good at their storytelling. I even fell in love with the food. Everything about it was so reminiscent of where I had grown up in Wisconsin. It had that very same sort of warm, embracing mentality and that sort of sly, wicked sense of humor, very dry and dour kinds of personalities. It felt like home to me. And so with each trip back to Scotland, I wanted to see all of these distilleries. I wanted to know the science behind making whiskey. And I was knocking down a lot of doors and asking for permission to go in on production room floors and for the operations managers to teach me about the pieces of equipment. And I think it was very befuddling for a lot of them as to why would anybody, first of all, why would you do this? Why would you be interested? And second of all, you're a girl. Why would a girl be interested in doing that? And many of them had, I see it from the optics of humor, but many of them were like, oh, you're looking for the kitchen, aren't you? You're one of the kitchen girls. Can you go bring us a pot of tea? I'm like, no, I would like to see, I'd like to study your still geometry. That's a lot more interesting to me. And, tell me about why the pitch of the line arm is as it is. And, weird things like that I just wanted to talk about, fermentation lengths. And so I think my ex-husband, who was accompanying me on many of these trips, was beginning to see that there was a genuine interest. And each time I would come home, I would write about these adventures because I didn't want to forget about them. And I have the memory capacity of like a goldfish with a head injury. So it was really, really good for me to put all that down into some sort of canonized project. And at the time I had a blog, and I still do, but it's a very, very specific sort of framework. It's a like story essay, very short form of like 800 or 900 words. So a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I thought, I'm just going to write down my adventures, and it's going to be a little bit of my own textbook of what I'm learning from these people. And then it can be a good reference point for myself later on when, sort of like my own Cliff's Notes version of my own textbook, if I needed a reminder of things that I was learning. And then it just so happened to be that my ex-husband said at one of my birthdays, I've given you this present. You're going to go to the academy. You're going to go spend some time learning how to be a distiller. And then you're going to come home and make us all wealthy because you're going to build a distillery in the garage. I said, that is not the purpose. But I nearly talked myself out of it 1,000 times, truly believing some of the nonsense that I was told, which was, this is not a very female-friendly industry and whatnot. So you're going to have to kind of muscle your way into it. And then also that imposter syndrome of like, I surely don't know enough, to be side by side by other people who are already in the industry doing this internship, or they're perfecting their skills. And how am I going to compare to them? And that internship was one of the most pivotal moments of my life because it just taught me the lesson that I am fueled by nothing more precious than curiosity, and that deserved to be satiated. That was reason enough for me to be there. So the purpose of the book is to help other people satiate their own curiosity in small bite-sized chunks and not feel that same sort of anxiety that I did as I was desperately trying to become part of this world.
Don't feel bad. I still suffer from imposter syndrome after 17 years.
I can't imagine that, Mark. You know more about whiskey than I've had hot dinners. Yeah.
No. I still learned things from reading your book on the things about yeast and things about the distilling science part, because I love the way you broke it down as someone who slept through high school chemistry.
Yes. The one thing I think I have going.
And I'm referring to myself as sleeping through chemistry, not you.
One of the things I think that I have working in my favor is the fact that I am bold enough to pick up the phone and cold call anybody at any university who's an expert in any field and say, I have a question and I need you to dumb it down into sixth grade answer for me so that I can then process it in my brain and then reform this in words that other people are going to not only understand, but find compelling, right? So they're going to want to learn about it, because who really wants to pay attention to yeast unless, it has something of great value that it can add to your life, or just humor. And so that's how I approached all of these many of these scientific topics, was to just add a story behind them, or some mythology behind it, or folklore, or whatever it is, just something in addition to the science so that people could remember it, but then use it to their benefit when they were next having a dram or talking about it with other friends who were interested in whiskey.
I have found very few whiskey books that made me laugh throughout, and just hearing some of the stories from the Academy, and we all know the folks that work there. If you've ever been to Brook-Laddie, what was it like actually going to the school? Because I envy you, because I never got a chance to go to the Academy.
It was brilliant. Again, like from the very, very beginning, when I parked my car in the little lot that they have there, and I'm going into the bottling hall asking, where do I go for the Academy? I'm here, I'm signed up for this internship, but before I could even get the words out to like, where do I go for the guy who was working in the bottling hall, he's like, gift shop? And I'm like, no. And he's like, kitchen? I'm like, no, the Academy. And he's like, what? I said, yeah, where do I go for the Academy? He's like, oh, well, up the hill. Everybody else is up there. All the guys are up there. So I trudge on up to the hill and bring my suitcases and come inside. And one of the dear women who were the kitchen witches, I called them. They were just masterful chefs in the kitchen, taking care of all of us while we were there. She's helping me find my room, and she's like, what are you doing here? We don't have a lot of girls come through this. What are you doing here? And she said, you realize that you can just shuffle on down 2 miles to Port Charlotte to the pub, and there's a million guys who will buy you a dram. And I said, I'm not interested in drinking it. I'm interested in making it. I really want to understand this. But I think I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who was my conversation partner for an event that we just did in Kentucky a few days ago, Dave Shurek, where we were discussing the differences between Scotland and America as far as how I see the people working within both countries' whiskey industries. And I said, I think in Scotland, what I saw for so long, for decades, was that it wasn't necessarily, certainly during the early times, it wasn't necessarily that people were going into distilling or production because it was a passion of theirs. Rather, this is what the people in our village do, right? This is the job I have. This is the job my dad had and my brother has. And so this is our work. And in America, it became very clear to me much later on that people who work in the whiskey distillery industry were more so like, our juice is fantastic, right? I mean, we really, really love what we do because we're passionate about it, and our bourbons are, God's gift, kind of a thing. There's a very, very different feeling of people working to pay electricity bills and other people working to make something, an elixir that's going to leave you astonished. Not that either one of them don't do both of those things, but it was just a very different kind of feel to it.
Yeah, Dave Shurek is an old friend too, so.
Yes, I adore Dave. I think the two of us could have spoken during that event for, a bazillion hours, but the bookshop owner at that point, she's like, I need to shut off the lights and everybody needs to go to home to sleep because it's getting late. But Dave is just, seriously walking wisdom of all things whiskey. And the two of us are in the planning stages at the moment of writing my next book, his first book, my next book together of like all the great Woodford stories and whatnot. And so, we'll get a bunch of his old friends together and they'll start compiling a beautiful book of essays, of historical, humorous essays.
Oh, I can't wait to read that. Dave's got some great stories.
He is a character for sure. Yeah. When he showed up at the event, he came with, he said, I'm going to be wearing my sporin. And I said, that's great. That's awesome. He's like, I'm only going to be wearing my sporin. I'm like, okay, that's fine as well. No problem. But instead of an actual sporin, and I don't know if all of your listeners know what a sporin is, but those are the parts of the Scottish dress of where it's sort of like a man purse that they wear draped below their belly button is where they keep all of their bits and pieces, coins and pocket knives and, any the shiny object that they find, but
usually a flask.
And a flask. Well, yeah, flasks are very important as well. But the thing Dave walked in with was it was like a small broom. It was like a paintbrush. It was like one of those sweeping brushes that a dustpan brush, and he had it strapped to his waist and hanging around him. God, it was so funny. Yeah, his sense of humor is unlike anybody else's. I've not come across something like that before.
I have to ask, what prompted you to take two young boys to Glen Eagles Resort?
Oh, daughter and son. Yes.
Daughter and son. I'm sorry.
No. Yes. It really wasn't my idea. I certainly didn't have any idea as to how posh Glen Eagles was until actually, walking in. And still to this day, I have no idea how much it cost for us to stay there. But it really doesn't matter. Those people work really, really hard in order to give you a good time. And I was still very much in the early stages of learning all about whiskey. And it was at Glen Eagles that I got my first opportunity to try something from Islay. Little did I know that Islay was going to be so important in my life, in just a few short years. But I like looking back at time and seeing those pinpoint moments on your life map to see like, all right there, that's the first time that you tried an Islay whiskey. And you didn't turn around and run. It didn't make you shrink. You still kind of moved forward and decided that you're going to grab the bull by two horns. One thing I was going to mention to you, talking about funny people, and we'd mentioned that we both were new and were very, very fond of Duncan McGilvery, the general manager for so long at Bruichladdich. But you were asking what it was like to be working at that academy. So his sense of humor is the thing that was like the lignin, like the cement that kept everybody's sanity. And I know he did that for anybody who worked beneath him. He was just so much knowledge and so much heart and so much sass. And that's what I found incredibly reassuring, was how he was constantly, throwing an arm around me and letting me know that I'm part of the group. There might be just you and all these fellas, but you are still instrumental to learning about this program and being involved in this program. But he would sometimes feed us stories that I'm not sure if they're apocryphal or true. And it doesn't really matter because they're Duncan McGilvery stories, right? And those are worth sharing. But he had this sense of humor where he would play around with people, tease them to see just how long he could pull a thread and how long he could get you to believe you. So he said there was a group of tourists that had come to visit him, of Japanese tourists who were very, very interested in the distillery and all the details of what was happening. And he was taking them to one of the peat bogs in order to see how peat is cut. And he said that the questions were so precise and they were demanding very specific answers. Somebody in the group raised their hand and they're like, how old is this peat bog? And Duncan said, well, I think it's probably about 3,000 years old. And another person raised their hand and said, is it more or less than 3,000 years old? And so Duncan, never missing an opportunity for farce, reached down into that mud and grabbed a fistful of peat and then rubbed it on his teeth. And he's like, it's 3,262. And this is how we measure it. And you all need to do this. And then they all did. So this is such a fabulous mental image of Duncan doing this to people.
Oh, that sounds exactly like Duncan. That sounds exactly like Duncan.
Such a spirit, such a soul.
Let's talk about your transition to actually working at a distillery. You work at Reservoir Distillery in Richmond, Virginia, as their director of education. How'd you make that move?
That is almost like a parallel story to how important the barkeeper was at Balburney House, in that I was researching for another book that I was writing, and I came into Reservoir to speak with the distiller there, and said, I have some questions about American distillation. I know, plenty about Scottish distillation and whatnot, and I'm very familiar with that, but I want to know, there's some intricacies, some differences and whatnot that I need to make sure that I'm getting correct for the book. And so Dave Cutno happened to be, he's the proprietor there, and he happened to be in the tasting room when I came in, and he started asking questions, and I told him, I write children's books and young adult fiction. And he said, you're going to be writing about whiskey for young adults and children. And I said, no, this is for a different book, but it's still, I put whiskey into every single one of my books. Shh, don't tell my editors this. But we got to start them young, right? 5th grade is like an appropriate time to start getting them interested in the science. And so as he's listening to my questions, he's like, well, we should taste through some of the whiskeys that we make here. And he said, I make 3 100% single grain whiskeys. I make a wheat, a corn, that's the bourbon, and a rye. And I said, yeah, we can try through them. That's fine. I just want to give you a heads up. I don't like bourbon. It's way too sweet for me. And he said, oh, gauntlet is thrown. That's it. And he's like, in a second, clunk, clunk, clunk. He puts 3 glasses and 3 bottles up there. And he's like, I am going to change your mind. So challenge was accepted. And what he did was teach me about these grains. And I think probably had there been a melding of those grains, had it been a mash bill that included more than just the corn, I probably would have felt a similar feeling. Or had the corn been from someplace else other than Virginia, which is a little bit less sweet than other places, I might have said the same thing. I was just like, this isn't for me. But having the opportunity to try all of them on their own gave me this chance to see, what does each grain taste like? And does it appeal to my palate? And then he's like, and then you can play master distiller and you can mix all of these 3 grains together and create any mash bill that you want to. And he's throwing in math because he's like, you love science, you love math. And all the combinations that you can create with just these 3 grains is like a number that's up to like 22 commas worth of combinations. It's just mind blowing, right? How many different mash bills, recipes that you can create with just those 3 grains. So I was thoroughly impressed, and we continued talking more about the science. And as we were talking, he said, why are you not working in this industry? And I said, well, I'm a writer. I write about it. I am researching about it all the time. I teach people via my writing, but I'm not hired by a distillery. He's like, well, we're definitely going to fix that. You're going to come work for me. and I said, what would you imagine I would do here in the distillery? He said, you're just, you're an encyclopedia of information about how whiskey is made, and in different places and with different technology, and, all the intricacies of the production room floor. Why would we not capitalize on that? I'm going to make you a job here in the distillery. So that is the first lucky break I found out that I had with Reservoir. And the second lucky break was finding out that Dave Cutno was not just a guy who was giving a woman a break in the whiskey industry. He was a talent seeker, right? So I found out I was hired by a person who was rather gender blind, which made me really grateful, but rather talent seeking. So I feel incredibly lucky to be working at Reservoir, where we are female led and female driven. We've got, women in the executive positions, leadership positions of our company, but also we have a head distiller, Mary Allison, who's making our incredible whiskey. So I cannot feel any luckier than I do, having gone through this long trajectory of, fighting to get into that whiskey industry as a woman, and now being in a distillery that thrives and survives because of being fueled by females.
We've talked about what you love about whiskey. What drives you nuts about whiskey these days?
Tasting notes. Listen, I know there are people out there in the world who are so gifted at picking out all the finery, all the delicacies. There's nothing more interesting than the study of the olfactory epithelium, right? And I know that I'm assuming you already know what that is. Maybe some of your listeners don't, but that tiny patch of tissue that's high in the nasal cavity, it holds about 400 receptors of all of our olfactory receptors, not everything, but a good chunk. And this is where our body has this opportunity to bind with aroma molecules, either in singular form or in combination form. And because of that, we can identify somewhere between 100 million and 1 trillion different odorants. So I love the study of scent. It is so important. And taste is equally as important. So, we've got the ability to taste sour and sweet and bitter and umami and sweet, so all of those 5 things. So scent plus taste equals flavor. And it's just such a much, much bigger component. What I love doing at the distillery is teaching people how to create their own skills in nosing and tasting. I think it's incredibly important for them to achieve these skills, to master them, or just to, practice them a little bit for their own enjoyment in learning about brown spirits, or any spirit, for that matter. It's just it's a beautiful enhancement of a dram of whiskey. But what I know to be frustrating, mostly from personal experiences, is that if you are given tasting notes, maybe before you have a chance to taste it by yourself, or you start reading the back of a bottle or a box before you have a chance to make that initial handshake on your own, uninfluenced by anybody else, and then you don't get those scents or those tastes, those flavors, you kind of feel like you don't belong in that club. And you might just sort of take your marbles and go home and miss out on something really, really beautiful. So I do make a point of telling students and employees and people I teach that if the whole room is getting coconut, right, and you are not, it is not because you're not trying hard enough. There's very, very likely, as I have been schooled to learn, that you have a neuroreceptor that just hasn't been turned on for that specific scent, for that odorant, for that flavor. And but there are other things that you might be getting that other people aren't. And so I don't want tasting notes ever to be a situation where it is an excluding kind of activity. I want it to be something that's rewarding at the back end. So I always try to, plug my ears anytime anyone's about to describe a whiskey to me or describe a spirit to me. I'm like, wait, just let me do this first. I want to go through this and then see what I get. And then, then be enamored with the beautiful language that some people can come up with as they are picking out all the fine bits and pieces of the odorants within those, the flavor and aroma profiles within whiskeys.
And we'll sneak in the quick plug for the episode from 2 weeks ago with Dr. Paul Wise from Monell Chemical Senses Center, where he explained how the olfactory epithelium works.
Oh, fantastic.
So what do you want to do next, besides write the book with Dave on Woodford Reserve?
Yeah, that is definitely, that's going to take up a good chunk of time. And we've got the rest of the what we call the book and bottle tour. So we're traveling around to all these different states, speaking to people about the book, speaking to people about our whiskeys, because of course that whiskey, the Reservoir rye whiskey is pivotal within my book as well. So I think for me, it's just to continue learning as much as I possibly can. I have this massive project within the distillery where I basically am the curator of all information, of all of our processes, all of our research and development, anything that is utilized in the creation of our whiskeys, whether it's collaborations with other people or the nitty gritty of like how long did we ferment this specific batch, to where did we get this grain and why does it taste different than that last batch. Every single tiny detail goes into this massive compendium. We call it the Bach. It's the book of knowledge. But Dave, the owner, he says, I think it's really important that should the zombie apocalypse ever occur and we're all, toast, and somebody a survivor walks into Reservoir off the street, I want them to be able to go to the Bach, the book of knowledge, and open it up and know exactly how to pick up production and create our whiskeys. So I think it brings a lot of security to most of the people that we're working with. They're like, this is what I'm doing in my shift with my job. And then I take all that information and then canonize it and put it into a workable form for us. So that is ongoing.
Wow.
It's fun. It's fun. Like one of the really cool projects that Dave wants me to take on is where Reservoir is located. It's in this place called Scott's Addition, and the distillery started back in 2008. There was nobody there. It was just warehouses and a couple of homeless people. It was really very sad. But over the next 15 years, that place became a 9 to 10 block radius of 9 or 10 different breweries, 3 cideries, a meadery, a winery, and all of this activity in this small hub is influential to our distillery because we have open top fermenters and we have these roller doors that we open up to the outside. We have this massive open aired fan up above, a window above the still, and a fan that just projects all this air across the fermentation tank. So Dave is like, I would like to know from our inventory, you're gonna map out when each one of these other distilleries and had come on board, and all of the wild yeast floating about in our yeast rich environment. How have they impacted our flavor profile, or have they? Right. So who do we have to thank for making something that tastes as good as it does? It would just be a fun project, but that would be cool.
We've posted a link for Shelley Sackier's website and blog in the show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com, along with a link for details on her book and bottle tour stops over the next few weeks. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start off with the Teeling Whiskey Company's Chinkapin Oak Matured Single Pot Still Whiskey that I mentioned during the news. It's bottled at 50% ABV, and the nose has notes of chocolate, coffee beans, dried tropical fruits, and a nice maltiness. The taste is thick and oily, with classic pot still baking spices, barley sugar, and tropical fruits in the background. The finish is long with lingering spices and a nice hint of dried fruits. I'm scoring the Teeling Whiskey Chinkapin Oak Matured Single Pot Still Irish Whiskey a 93. A couple of weeks ago, I mentioned the latest Rabbit Hole Founders Collection release. Nivalier is a 16-year-old bourbon finished for the last year in French oak. It's bottled at 57.9% ABV. The nose has notes of oak tannins, caramel, butterscotch, leather, tobacco, and hints of citrus and cherry wood. The taste has good spices, complemented by touches of blackberries, figs, tobacco, vanilla, and honey, while the finish has hints of dried flowers that balance nicely with lingering spices and a touch of oak. I'm scoring Rabbit Hole's Nivalier a 92. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, But first, our tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. They're reviving the tradition of Maryland-style rye at their waterfront distillery in Baltimore. Their premium canned cocktails are a refreshing, convenient option while playing a round of golf, sitting poolside, or spending a day at the beach. You can enjoy flavors like lemon tea fizz and honey paloma, and they're now available in markets across the U.S. Find them at a retailer near you by visiting sagamorespirit.com/find-rye. Please drink responsibly. Few Spirits has been teaming up with top rock bands for the last several years, and the latest collaboration with the members of Black Rebel Motorcycle Club gets its name from one of the band's catchphrases. The term motor oil is considered high praise within the group, and Few's Motor Oil Whiskey is a blend of Few bourbons finished in rum and vermouth casks with a mesquite-smoked wheat whiskey. It's bottled at 50.5% ABV. The nose is earthy and grassy with a touch of garden herbs, wood smoke, honey, and oak tannins. The taste has good spicy notes of clove, cinnamon, and white pepper, along with oak tannins, mesquite smoke, garden herbs, and a hint of mushrooms. The finish is long and dry with a kiss of smoke, and I'm scoring Few's Motor Oil Whiskey a 93. Finally, let's look at the Chattanooga Whiskey Company's Cask Strength Bourbon. It's a 4-grain bourbon with yellow corn, malted rye, caramel malted barley, and honey malted barley. Well, I guess technically that makes it a 3-grain, 4-type whiskey. It's bottled at 55.5% ABV. The nose is subtle and complex with caramel, honey, dried flowers, and a hint of cocoa. The taste is thick and chewy with chocolate and caramel notes, balanced by a touch of black pepper, honey, and dried flowers. The finish is nice and long, with lingering pepperiness and hints of oak and chocolate. I'm scoring the Chattanooga Whiskey Cask Strength Bourbon a 93. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,300 different whiskeys from all over the world. You can search the tasting notes by name, type, country, and even a specific score. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
So, in Spain, they call Redbreast Petit Roco. It's me, but a touch more exotic. Kind of like a Redbreast PX edition. Finished in Pedro Jimenez casks, adding a velvety and decadent dimension. You know, I won't lie. A climate like this makes me wish I was a migratory bird.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Time now for Your Voice, presented by Scarabus Islay Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. It took a couple of months, but our box of Glencairn WhiskyCast glasses finally made it to South Africa and March's Whiskey Club of the Month. Got an email from Willem Killian this weekend. Dear Mark, the Whiskey Warriors of Bloemfontein, South Africa, salute you. A huge thank you once again to you and Glencairn Crystal for this magnificent prize. Unfortunately, we didn't have our full complement of members at the last tasting. A couple of people were out of town. But I just thought I'd show you that we received the glasses in good order and really appreciate it. It's helping a lot, especially with horizontal tastings of multiple whiskeys. They really are better than the knockoff glasses I've been using for the last couple of years. Cheers, Willem. And he enclosed a couple of photos that we'll share on social media. Thank you for the update, Willem. We were able to track the package only until it left the U.S. And if you're in a whiskey club, there is still time to nominate your club for July's Whiskey Club of the Month honors. Just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. You can also use the contact form if there's anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, or you can always just get in touch with us on social media. Look for WhiskyCast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, or just email us. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Scarabus, the Islay single malt from Hunter Lang & Company that celebrates all of Isla's natural gifts in one bottle. Only those who seek shall find Scarabus. Start your search today at hunterlang.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label. It's our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. And it's brought to you by Writer's Tears. Our longtime friend James Espy shared a cartoon with us via email this weekend. It shows a guy filling his car up with bottles of Johnnie Walker Blue Label and telling the guys at the gas pump that he thought he'd try something cheaper. James added, quote, I knew creating and launching this brand worldwide in 1987 at the then United Distillers made sense, with a laughing emoji. That's right. It's the 35th anniversary this year of Johnnie Walker Blue Label. James Espy created it along with the late blender Tom Jago when they were at United Distillers back in the day. But as he told me in a 2014 interview, it started out with a different name.
We originally called it Johnnie Walker Oldest. What I wanted was a halo brand. And I asked Tom to find me the oldest whiskey in quite condition he could find at the time. I wanted a halo brand to support Black Label and I'm a great believer in pulling, image building as part of the a kind of a ladder effect, a triangular ladder. And so we found a barrel of 6-year-old, which we blended a little bit with predominantly 15-year-old. It was a 50, but it was a brilliant blend. And we found, Tom created a bottle as you would have imagined it to be 100 years ago, and we called it Johnnie Walker Oldest. And we launched it carefully, priced it appropriately, as it is today, and got it on Concord, got it all over the place, and it took off. And the only thing that changed is when I left the company and became the president of Shivers Brothers, my main brand was Royal Salute, which I knew was 21. Now, Blue Label is an outstanding whiskey, and I'm not sure what age it is today, but that's not the point. We found there was a new man at United Distillers who had come from McKinsey, nothing to do with the heritage of the industry, and he was pushing in nightclubs in Taiwan, Johnnie Walker Oldest, 60 years of age, Royal Salute, 21. That's ethically and morally incorrect. So we got the law changed, and the law says today you can only mention the youngest age of any whiskey in a blend. So they changed the name from Johnnie Walker Oldest to Blue Label, and it's a phenomenal brand, and I'm very proud of it.
And that law continues to this date. If there is something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copper Pot, an 18th century style of premium Irish whiskey, blended from single pot still and single malt. Like yourself, it's one of life's treasured rarities, and what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copper Pot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, cocktail recipes, and much more, including a complete archive of all of our past episodes that goes all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address, comments at whiskycast.com.
Classic Scotch cocktails are making a resurgence, and the Dewar's Highball is a great way to brighten up some of your favorite Scotch whiskey. Dewar's, ice, club soda, and a citrus garnish is all you need. Happy sailing. Cheers.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Hiya, Mark. How's my favourite Redbreast fan doing? Look, I'm going to address the elephant in the room right away. We both know your podcast is dying for a co-host, and I know just the lad who can be the Robin to your Batman. How's that for dropping a hint?
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast, Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2022, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.